Hi, everyone. This is Nathan with People's Town Hall. Thanks for joining us this morning. We are here in Linn County, Oregon. I am virtually in Linn County. Senator Wyden, I believe, is in Albany. And we are going to have another virtual town hall meeting with Senator Wyden and his constituents from across Linn County. People's Town Hall, for those who do not know us, is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to the simple idea that our democracy is stronger and better when our elected leaders take regular occasion to meet with and listen to the people they work for. We do not ask people's party affiliation. We do not ask who you voted for, or even if you voted. If you're a constituent and you have a topic to raise at these town halls, you are welcome. So, Senator Wyden, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Nathan, thank you for doing this. And good morning to everybody in beautiful Linn County. I am at the Linn Benton Community College campus in the community. It is a cold and chilly day in wonderful Linn County. And this is not about giving filibusters. This is about listening to you. But I do want to make note, in addition to wonderful education here at the community college, Linn County just has got to be the best place on the planet for taking care of veterans. And I'm so pleased that that's the case and very proud of that. And people talk about it with me constantly. So this is part of a commitment I made to Oregonians. We were choosing our first new senator. I'd have an open meeting to everyone in all 36 counties. So this is town hall meeting number 1012 of the meetings that I committed to do to Oregonians. There are no subjects off limits. Nathan, thank you to People's Town Hall for throwing open the digital doors of government. And I'm just going to touch on a couple of issues that relate to what I call the Oregon way, which is just to listen to the community, focus on what's important. We've had some successes, recently, everything from the $1.5 million to expand the new composting facility at the Albany Millersburg Water Reclamation Facility helps to build a stronger quality of life in rural communities. Very proud of what we've been able to do with respect to both fire prevention. I wrote the law to make it impossible to raid fire prevention money for other purposes. Secure rural schools legislation has been so important for schools and roads. And I think after the big fires, we knew that we had to do a better job of improving broadband. And during the Recovery Act, we were able to get additional funds for high-speed internet. And that's been important to a huge number of rural residents in Linn and Polk counties, both. Today we're in Linn, and also additional money for mental health services, and have been very proud to have been able to work closely with Commissioner Nyquist on the intermodal reload facility, which can allow semi-trucks to haul shipping containers to Millersburg, where containers would be reloaded onto rail cars headed to ports of Portland, Tacoma, and Seattle. And a big chunk of ARP dollars, the recovery program dollars, were focused on that. So this is really a chance to listen. Albany is a long way from Washington, D.C., and I think sometimes rural folks feel that for all practical purposes, Washington, D.C. might as well be Mars for all the connection it has with their lives. So what I'm here to do is to kind of shorten that distance, respond to what residents have on their mind today, and no subjects off limits. I think I heard from you, Nathan, that you got lots of folks interested in some issues that the community's been talking about a lot lately, and let's just go right to them.
Terrific. First up, we have Cindy from Brownsville.
Hi.
There you are, Cindy, on my screen.
I'm here.
Go.
Well, first, I want to thank you for introducing the River Democracy Act. And this isn't my question, but I hope you'll let us know what we can do to help get that bill passed before the end of this hour.
Right.
And Senator Wyden, I assume that you agree that forest defense is climate defense.
Very much so.
Yeah, and that mature and old growth forests are more resilient to wildfire. And these mature and old growth forests should be permanently protected on public lands, and they're not. I just want to know how you and this administration could help create a paradigm shift for management by the United States Forest Service from timber harvest for short-term gains to preservation of forests to preserve the earth.
Great question, Cindy. And I think we're taking some steps, not as aggressive as you and I would like, but taking some steps in the right direction. You know, the president has announced a major effort with respect to addressing these long-term issues. And I feel very strongly about it because so much of what we've done in forestry really hasn't picked up on sensible science. For example, I've been the leader in the Congress in terms of promoting prescribed burns. We saw what prescribed burns could do. You talk to people in Sisters and they'll say, that pretty much saved the town. You know, what you have with prescribed burns is you go in during the cold, weather month and do very carefully science-driven approaches to try to reduce forest risk. And you bring together scientists and environmental folks and forestry, timber people and the like, and you really think it through. It is kind of like almost an environmental ethic built around stewardship. You know, there are stewardship contracts. I was able to get one that saved the mill and John Day. So there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle. But whether it's prescribed burns, whether it's science-driven thinning, which is extremely important because what's out there on the forest floor today, there's more material, there's bigger amounts, it's hotter, it gets dry, and all of a sudden you have an inferno on your hands. So I think that the Biden most recent proposal, which also calls for professionalizing the Forest Service, ensure that we attract more people with the kind of science background you're talking about, paying better wages. All of this are some of the steps that make up the beginning of an approach to really be much more aggressive about ensuring that our forests are more resilient, and it makes sense from a climate standpoint and a forestry standpoint. Now, let me mention one other thing. In the new program that's being debated now, usually called Build Back Better, the linchpin of the climate agenda is the bill I wrote in the Finance Committee. I took the tax code and I threw it in the garbage can, all 44 breaks. And I said, in the future, we'll have one for clean energy, one for clean transportation, one for energy efficiency. And then we said we'll be technology neutral. So you can do something that talks to what you're talking about, is better science. And we would say there'll be a whole new measure. You want to have a measure for climate? I said in the future, the more you reduce carbon emissions, the bigger your tax savings. The more you reduce carbon emissions, the bigger your tax savings. That bill alone, Cindy, hits more than half of the Biden target for carbon emission reductions by 2050. It passed the Finance Committee. It has strong support, and I believe it's going to become law. It's a great question to start us off, all about the future.
Thanks for joining us, Cindy. Next up, we have Woody.
Thank you, Senator Wyden, and hosting another town hall, which is foundational to democracy and civic engagement. My name is Woody Jackson, and today I represent Friends of the Bright Bush Cascades. The 2020 Oregon wildfires impacted several forests and rivers included in the River Democracy Act of 2021. I want to thank you for your support, and I hope continuing support for these recently impacted rivers. Whether covered and shaded by a green forest or open and denuded by the impacts of fire, these rivers continue to have importance to the people of Oregon. Friends of the Bright Bush Cascades provided a letter of support for the nomination of the Bright Bush River, and we continue in our enthusiastic support for the inclusion of the Bright Bush River in the River Democracy Act. Since the nomination, our organization has continued in support of wild and scenic for the Bright Bush River, and we have worked with SOLVE and the Oregon Marine Board in its Adopt a River program to include the Bright Bush River so we can help to steward this remarkable river. Senator Wyden, can you confirm your support for the nominated rivers when impacted by fire? And I too have the question, what can we do as citizens to ensure this important legislation is passed and enacted? Thank you.
Well, Woody, I guess I can confirm my support for a bill I wrote and that includes the Brighton Bush. And kidding aside, I'm so glad you're speaking up for it. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource for Oregonians, particularly for folks who want to know kind of the location. We really wanted to protect the Brighton Bush upstream from Detroit. So good work. So appreciate your speaking out with community groups. And here's the thing. Recreation is a big economic engine for this area. It's a big economic engine for our state. Billions of dollars comes into our state. And there's so many jobs. I mean, just the stores where people sell gear and equipment, and you usually want to have people that'll take you out and guides, and it's a big economic multiplier, including all the people who come and spend money at our stores and go have a craft brew and a nice piece of salmon after they've been out on the river hiking around, and all of the things that make Oregon such a special place. Now, the River Democracy Act also protects private property. People have asked about that, and does more to protect us against fire, because we work very closely seeking the advice of the Forest Service on how to have fire protection zones. And rivers that are protected are required to have a fire protection plan in order to be aggressive in terms of fire prevention. So it's kind of, for me, a little bit like the town meetings, is we went to the grassroots in Oregon to get people's opinion. This wasn't a bill written in Washington, D.C. We asked Oregonians to nominate rivers. That's what you all did. 3 cheers for grassroots government. And there was an earlier comment about what folks could do with respect to climate and rivers. Clearly, political change doesn't start in Washington, D.C. and government buildings and trickle down. It's almost always grassroots up. And so I really encourage people to do just what you all are talking about.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Woody. Next up, we have Bill.
Good morning, Senator. A couple of side notes here. First of all, I've been to your office in Washington, D.C. with the National Wildlife Federation a couple of times, and you and your staff are top-notch, very good listeners, and I really appreciate that. On another side note, several years ago, my wife, who was an RN at Good Sam here in Corvallis, went to New Orleans to help with Katrina, and she became seriously ill, and you were very instrumental in getting her life flighted back here so she could get the medical care she needed. And I really appreciate that.
I remember that. Good. How's she doing now?
She is fine. She's now retired, and
terrific.
And
we need our nurses.
Yes, and she always wanted me to thank you for that, and so I'd like to thank you for that once again. My question is, and I've been president of Northwest Steelheaders for several years, and where we like, you know, our main concern obviously is the salmon and steelhead runs here in the Pacific Northwest and Oregon. And primarily now, with what you can involve yourself with is the spring Chinook run on the Columbia River, where I have fished that for 40 years now. And we constantly see the runs going down, 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 and the fishing season's shorter and shorter and shorter. And this affects the economy throughout the state and in Northwest. And the solution, obviously, one of the main solution is to free the Snake River and have wild fish, wild Chinook, spring Chinook on the Snake River. So those are our constrained species. And I would like to hear your comments on how we can free the Snake River and return our runs. A recent study showed that if we can free the Snake River, we can have 10 times the number of spring Chinook we now have. And also, as an advocate for wildlife, as you might know, that this will also help our orca population off our coast and off of Washington, as their only food source is Chinook.
Bill, you're making very important points, and I think you can tell from my approach to the Breitenbush and rivers and climate that I strongly favor those kinds of approaches that are preservation oriented and certainly include our wonderful spring Chinook runs. My sense is the way we're going to get at these Snake River issues is really to think through how we bring people together and promote the multiple uses so that we don't have really just a litigation derby. You know, what I've tried to do, and it was part of how we saved the mill in John Day, it was, you know, the only rural mill that people had, you know, then they said, Ron, you got to step in. I brought together the environmental folks, the industry people, got them a stewardship contracts, made such a huge difference. But if you don't bring people together, instead of a win-win that helps your jobs and protecting the environment, what you get is basically a lose-lose. So what I and Senator Merkley and the Washington delegation, Senator Murray, Senator Cantwell are, you know, talking about is how you go about, you know, doing that in a way that is really going to help us balance the multiple uses. That's number one. Number two, I was recently, like a couple of days ago, in Astoria with the ambassador, our U.S. trade representative, Catherine Tai. I brought her to talk particularly about fish runs. And I was amazed at the number of people who were talking about all the damaging practices, for example, that China uses, and how those practices can actually affect the well-being of fishers in Oregon and on the coast and the like. So I'll have some more to say about that as well down the road. But multiple use is critical on the snake. And Ambassador, you know, Tai had some very interesting things to say about China. And some of the witnesses, probably people you know really well, said, well, Ron, don't you think it's time for some kind of law so that people, when they buy fish, they know where it was caught? And I said, sure as hell it's time for that. And so we're going to talk about that as well. We had good interest a couple of days ago with the U.S. Trade Representative in that as well.
Thank you. I really agree that we have to involve everybody and have a common sense solution.
Good. Otherwise, I mean, we overwhelmingly, and I hear this in these meetings when I talk about the Oregon way, people say on resources, you want to win-win. You want to protect jobs, you want to have more jobs, you want to protect the environment. If you don't find some common ground, as I did in saving that mill at John Day, you get a lose-lose. You don't have the jobs and you don't protect your treasures. So that's what I'm committed to doing. That's how I got the bill passed to end fire borrowing. is how I got the bill passed to have secure rural schools, which, brought Oregon more than $3.5 billion. I think it's our largest aggregation of funds that I know of with respect to services in Oregon for schools and roads. And you do it by bringing people together.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for joining us, Bill. I want to let folks know who are watching on Facebook. We will have some time to get to a few of your questions as well. So if you are an Oregonian, particularly if you're in Linn County, share your questions in the comments. Please frame it in a question, hopefully short enough for me to read, and we'll get to a few of those. But next up, we have Jim. Jim, you are muted. Feel free to unmute yourself.
That'd help with that.
Where's Jim? All right.
Yeah, there we go. Morning, Senator.
Hey, thanks for turning out on a cold, wonderful morning in Linn.
Well, thank you very much for showing up here. I really appreciate you taking the time and effort to help us solve some of these problems that we have in the area.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm going to tag on to Bill Kramer's question and his comments on it. My ideas were basically the same on the salmon runs and the dam removal. Now, I know that we have the dam removal proposed for a lot of people, but how are you going through the solutions to negate all of the problems that are from like the fuel industry or the energy industries, the different railroad, different problems that removing those dams would cause on it?
Jim, your point is very good, and I'm glad to be able to amplify a little bit. Those are some of the key economic groups. Obviously shipping. That was why I was glad to have the trade representative here. Something close to 1 out of 3 jobs in Oregon depends on trade. The trade jobs often pay better than do the non-trade jobs because there's a higher value add. And right here where I'm sitting at the community, college, not very far from here, are a lot of farmers who produce wonderful, wonderful crops, and they depend on global markets. I mean, Linn County is very sensitive to trade. So the reason I talked to Bill about the stakeholders is you got to have the shippers and the rail people and the fuel people and the like. And they're going to say, point blank, we want to know how somebody's going to make a living because we have, jobs associated with it. And I've always said there are jobs on all sides here. There's jobs as it relates to recreation. There's jobs as it relates to fish protection. Let's all figure out how to find some common ground. And then, as I did before, when things were really on the line in John Day, and you can talk to people about this, I brought everybody together. We saved the mill, and a lot of people are getting good salaries. And by the way, the number of environmental differences in terms of litigation and the like has gone down as well. So you really do have to bring a little bit of, the Oregon way. I like to think if Tom McCall got that question, he'd answer it a lot better than I would, but he'd talk about the same kinds of values, the same kinds of approaches. You notice, I've been sitting here for a while, taking people's questions. Nobody said, what's the Democratic approach? What's the Republican, approach? Hadn't been a bad comment in the House from residents of Linn County. People have been thoughtful, informed. They want to get results. They don't want to hear a bunch of blah, blah, blah from government. A lot of folks are hurting. I was just thinking the other day, practically thousands of Oregon families have a family member who's struggling right now. So we got to get some results.
Thank you, Senator.
Great.
Well put by you, Jim and Bill. And I'm glad that you guys are kind of recognizing a big chunk of the Oregon way and what Tom McCall did in building coalitions around natural resources. That's what Roger Nyquist and a lot of the folks here locally are trying to do too.
Thanks for joining us, Jim.
Thanks.
So we're going to go to a few online questions, as well as some questions sent along by Linn Community College students who were unable to join us live here. But first, we have a question from Valerie in Crawfordsville, who says, Senator, are you pushing the president to secure the border? And if not, why? I want to understand why our border is not secured with illegal immigrants that can come across in millions every year.
I'm really glad that Linn County residents want to go into this, border issue, because like so many, issues, I find that, so often the choices aren't really representative of what we really need for our country. And by the way, my parents fled the Nazis in the 30s. Not all got out. My father was thrilled to serve in our army, where he was involved in dropping the propaganda pamphlets on the Nazis. We have pictures of him with bullhorns, translating the terms of surrender from the Nazis to us. And my dad was honored recently as one of the Ritchie boys, a big 60 Minutes show about Jewish kids who fled the Nazis and served in our war effort. So the Wyden family feels very strongly about this. And I will just start the discussion. I believe, Nathan, you said that was Valerie who just asked the question?
That's Valerie, yeah.
Okay. Valerie, I start with the proposition that we need two core values. Of course, we need to secure our borders. And I also think there is a strategy for doing that that is also humane. And let me kind of touch on what this is, all about. I have voted for laws that have provided over $110 billion in border security. And many of the challenges we're having on these border crossings is this where drugs are coming in, this is where you have unauthorized entry. And the question is, are we going to be smart about what we're doing? So what I have supported is more officers, better equipment, where necessary, fencing and other barriers. I believe the Biden proposal is going to support additional funds to curb illicit activity, strengthen our security. I have to see all of the details. I think all corners of our state believe that the immigration system is just flat out broken. And we need a system that promotes our security and allows for a growing U.S. economy. And I'm looking at every tool in the Senate to move these priorities, forward. But, people, say, what's being done on border security? I want us to have smart security. And I'll just say respectfully, without getting into some big, political brawl, I didn't think that there was a lot of value in the wall, but there sure is a lot of value in technology, officers, equipment, where necessary, fencing, physical barriers. That's part of a smart security approach. And I think it can be done in a humane way.
Great. Well, thanks for the question, Valerie. So we're going to go to a few questions from Linn Community College students. One asks, students, especially parent students who make up 42% of LBCC's student body, are struggling with rising rents and finding affordable housing. Senator, how can we help deal with the cost of housing increasing?
I think it would be fair to say across the state are really up against it when it comes to housing. And this is true of our state and our country. Right now, 1 in 4 renters in our state pays over half their take-home pay every month for rent. And the financial strain leaves so many families basically just one emergency away from real financial, ruin. So what I have tried to do is kind of push on sort of two tracks. We've been able to get some relief, for renters out of these proposals that have gotten through Congress recently, but it's nowhere near enough. And we're going to need bigger and bolder challenges. So I have focused in terms of two areas that I think would really help those parent students in my DASH Act, decent, affordable, safe housing for all. The analysts who've looked at it said it would build over 2 million additional affordable homes in 10 years. Also, I've been able to cut red tape associated with closings and the like with my electronic signatures law. And a lot of the home builders have told me that without my e-signature bill, when there were no notaries and lawyers and couriers and all the people for closings, it would have been much harder to achieve the closings that we did. Now, I'm also in favor of a low income housing tax credit, which residents have liked, developers have liked, minimum red tape. And it's been so popular that I have proposed, in addition to that low income housing tax credit called LIHTC, a middle income housing tax credit, what's called MITAC. And it just seems to me that affordable rental housing for middle income families has been in such short supply. I'm promoting MITAC, and our housing legislation also includes a $15,000 tax credit for first-time, home buyers. So we're trying to put everything we got into this, the tax credits, housing vouchers for unhoused folks and homeless families, and parts of my DASH Act have already passed the House, and I'm working to get them through the Senate. But this is a hugely important issue. This is a calamity for so many Oregon families who are spending so much of their disposable income on housing. And I particularly want to see the people that you're talking about, parents and students. I think they make up a big chunk of the student body. I think I've seen reports it's like 40%. And they're kind of walking an economic tightrope. And I think those ideas that I mentioned can be of some real help.
Great. Well, we have another question from a student that says, student aid has been so critical for us, along with the stimulus payments last year, but is it sustainable? Would love to hear the senator's views.
Well, I think the question, is student aid is one of those kind of building blocks that are part of the path to high skill, high wage, jobs. And there have been Pell Grants in the past. That's been a big tool for higher education. I've been supportive of expanding that to make Pell funds non-taxable. The point really is we've got a choice, particularly right now, where employers are looking for workers. I see that in practically every single field imaginable. Making sure that there's aid for the college and the students is a real lifeline, not just for the students, but for the region and the economy. So I'm going to continue to support funding. We were able in the rescue plan, I think the questioner touched on this, to secure almost $40 billion for college help, particularly including community colleges. Funds can be used for enrollment and re-enrollment, for giving unpaid student balances, for expanding job training programs for folks who lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic. And what I think the questioner wants to know is, will I, as your senior United States Senator and Chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, will I support this in the future? The answer is absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you to the students at LBCC for sending those questions along. We're going to go to a few questions on Facebook. Again, if you are watching and participating in the conversation on Facebook, if you frame your comment in the form of a question, I will select a few of them. So we have a really interesting one from John who asks, Senator, is there a farm policy that is going to encourage wheat production this growing season? The Willamette Valley, if it shifted from grass seed to wheat, could help in the upcoming food shortage.
Well, I think clearly we need, over the short term, some fresh policies to meet our needs for nutritious food, and wheat is right up at the top of the list. Tell me a little bit about the support among farmers for doing that. Grass seed has been so important for decades in this area. Tell me about how you might supplement that with wheat.
Well, so John is commenting on Facebook. John, if you want to follow up with a response to the senator's question, I would be happy to read it on your behalf.
Let's do that. Let's have John. John, we'll move on to other questions. I'd like to hear some more about your idea. I think it's very attractive. Certainly diversifying agriculture in our heavily ag areas like this one make a lot of sense. And I would just be interested in hearing how it would fit with grass seed and other priorities for the valley.
Great. I will pass along John's response when we get it. So I'm going to move on to a question from Judith, who asks, our young people are struggling to find good jobs, yet the national unemployment rate is low. My daughter recently applied to a job. The employer received over 1,000 applications. Americans, especially young Americans, are having difficulty finding decent jobs.
I'd like to know what field the mom's daughter is in, because I can tell you in healthcare alone, the number of jobs for people in nursing and folks in the respiratory areas. I mean, that was so important in the pandemic. There are a huge number of jobs, and our community colleges have really been front and center in terms of trying to promote those kind of healthcare services. But if the mom can give me a little bit more information offline, we can refer her to some areas where employers are looking for people and they're paying good wages.
Great. Well, Judith, if you want to DM People's Town Hall, happy to put you in touch with Senator Wyden's team, or if you want to follow up in the comments with additional info, I'd be happy to pass that along as well.
Nathan, the last two questions, both with respect to diversifying agriculture and getting into new areas and making sure that young people can find jobs, ought to be front and center of every economic conversation in the state, because I think there are a lot of people of goodwill who would be interested in both topics. And I want to hear from that mom what areas, for example, her daughter was looking at. And, you know, I just touched on healthcare because I've been out talking to so many healthcare providers. I can tell you there's a very substantial array of opportunities for young people.
So we have a question from Nancy. Nancy says, reducing emissions alone is not going to put a dent in slowing the negative effects of climate change. We must also pull and sequester CO2 from the atmosphere. Older, mature forests have great potential to sequester and store significant amounts of carbon, but these forests, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, are still being logged. Senator, will you push the Forest Service to protect big and mature trees in our forests? Can you assist in putting a halt to the logging of old-growth forests?
Well, couple of things. First, I do strongly support protection for old growth. Number one, I'm going to kind of walk through it, and I just want to take a little bit of an exception to the first part of the conversation. Curbing emissions is going to take a lot of significant approaches, and all of the scientists and the objective analysts who've looked at my Clean Energy for America bill have said that by changing the tax code so as to, in effect, redo the incentives in terms of the American economy and say for the first time, the more you reduce emissions, the bigger your tax savings. The evidence is from groups like the Rhodium Group that is very knowledgeable in the field. This will achieve more than 50% of the president's target for reducing carbon emissions. That's number one. Number two, part of what we want to do in this session of Congress and pushing the Forest Service under the Biden leadership is to do more in terms of old growth protection. I wrote the first old growth protection effort in the Senate. And so this needs to be part of a strategy with respect to multiple use. I mean, yes, we ought to protect these old growth trees, and you've made a great case for why it makes sense for the environment because of what it does for capturing CO2. I'm all in, all in. And the point is, whether it's scientific efforts to thin and prescribe burns, protection for old growth, these are some of the key pieces of the puzzle. And I've tried to use my position on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee to promote growth in a variety of ways and wrote the first old growth protection law.
Great. Well, thanks for the question, Nancy. I have a question here from Lynn, and this may not be directly a federal issue, but I wanted to share it. Lynn says, Senator, is there any relief for low-income seniors with huge property taxes forcing them out of their homes?
Well, the federal government in charge, of property taxes, but certainly there are multiple areas where the federal government can help seniors meet their financial needs. For example, I'm leading the effort to hold down the cost of prescription drugs in areas like insulin, where we've got many older people and others who have huge diabetes health challenges and costs. Diabetes medicine, insulin particularly, has increased many-fold over the years, and it's not any different insulin. It's the same, insulin. So what I've tried to do, whether it's holding down the cost of medicine, our efforts to hold down the cost of food, I have the bipartisan bill to rein in the packers, where the evidence is that there are anti-competitive practices in meat that drive up our food costs. You bet that there are areas where the United States Congress can step in, starting with holding down the cost of these medicines, where people in pharmacies pretty close to where I'm sitting feel like they're getting mugged at the pharmacy counter. That's part of what the Congress can do to provide some cost relief to the person who asked about how she's going to pay for her bills.
Great. Senator, when you were pounding the table for results there, I think you moved your camera up. I don't know if somebody there in the room can adjust that so we can see you again.
Pounding the table should not disturb people's right to see and hear what's being discussed.
Terrific. So we have a question from Russell, who says, Senator, is the Attorney General ever going to hold those House and Senator members who helped plan and carry out the January 6th attack on our Capitol?
He has said that investigation is moving ahead. I think that's incredibly important business. We saw more texts released this weekend of efforts where people were trying to overturn the election results and the like. I think it is very, very important that the Attorney General, Mr. Garland, finish his work for those kinds of reasons. It's time to make sure that there's justice.
Great. Well, thanks for the question, Russell. We have a question from Ruth Ann. Senator Wyden, can you share your views on the FAIR Act that proposes a 5.1% pay raise in 2023 for federal workers and President Biden's budget proposal for a 4.6% pay raise in 2023? Do you support either of these pay raises for federal workers?
Yeah, I support fair living wages for all workers, including federal workers. It's my understanding that the FAIR Act just passed the House, so I'm looking forward to reviewing it and getting into it in the Senate. And if the person asking the question can get in touch with us, we'll follow up. But I've long been concerned about making sure that there are fair wages and economic rules for federal workers, because if you don't, you make it harder to attract the quality people that folks in Linn County and everywhere else want. So I'm in support of fair wages. The FAIR Act passed the House, and I'll be digging into it when Congress comes back this week. This week is going to be about getting around the state. I'm heading for rural Oregon right after Easter, and looking forward to hearing from folks there.
Terrific. I know we already covered it in two questions here on the Zoom, but Senator, I want to pass along the Snake River dams topic is an extremely popular one in the comments, and I don't know if you had any.
But it is extremely popular because it sort of reflects, Nathan, where we want our state to go. This is a huge resources question. We had folks, I think the first question involved the spring Chinook. There were questions relating to economic, industries that would be affected, whether it's rail or shipping or fuel and the like. And it very much lends itself for a discussion of how you really look at balancing the various kinds of issues in terms of coming up with a sensible position. There are people who say, it's all about just, the economy. There are people that are saying all about, preservation. I think you got to focus on both. And by the way, just simplifying things, as I mentioned, really misses the point. Some of the best efforts to promote clean energy and clean environmental practices are great jobs producers, very substantial, jobs producers. So I think the reason you've got a lot of people coming back to the Snake River dams, and I'm glad that they are, is it really highlights what I call the need to bring people together, as we did in rural Oregon to save that mill in John Day, because you can get a win-win that way. And I think the evidence shows that if you basically stack the deck for one way at the expense of others, or shortchange the right for people, to be heard, very often you don't get a win-win, you get a lose-lose. And to me, what Linn County has always been about, and you see it in the wonderful care that veterans get here and how people talk about veterans here. It's always been about appealing to common sense and fairness and bringing people together. And that's what I think public service is all about. This is town hall meeting number 1012. Nobody in Oregon government has ever done anything like this, ever. And I did it because I said, and particularly for rural areas, I'm from Portland. My only regret is I didn't get to play for the Trailblazers. Went to school on a basketball scholarship, but I was too small and I made up for it by being slow. But I'm not a United States Senator to represent the state of Portland. I'm a United States Senator to represent every nook and cranny. And that's why I'll be all over Eastern Oregon here in a couple days.
Great. We have time for just a couple more. We have a question from Russell, who asks, Senator, the House recently passed a bill legalizing marijuana federally. Could you tell us where that bill is in the Senate?
I'm very hopeful that we can move on comprehensive cannabis legislation. The majority leader, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Booker, and I are kind of the leaders of the effort to pull together the bill. The bill will, in my view, be sent to the Senate Finance Committee, where the chairman, because of tax issues, and we very much need a federal framework. As we know, Oregon has legalized, and that's been the will of Oregon voters. And here's an example of one reason why it's important to have federal legislation for Oregonians. We've all been hearing about these illegal grows in Southern Oregon that really are putting people at risk in terms of their safety and damaging the environment. Well, anytime you don't have a federal kind of framework, basically the bad guys just try to get out in front of the rules and head for the places where it's illegal. So you very much need a kind of federal framework here. And I want to get help for the small cannabis businesses. It's what's called 280E. Want to make sure that we deal with the banking rules, which is safety. But Oregon has voted to legalize. And I think we also need a federal framework. And the most obvious example is we got to deal with these criminals that are taking advantage of the rules and are responsible for so much of the illegal grows.
Great. We have a follow-up from John, who asked the question about wheat production. John says...
John, very interested. Go to it.
John says, in the past few years, there's been an abundance of clover being planted. I'm sure it's good for the soil. I'm not a farmer, John says. I just feel it is important to prepare for the upcoming worldwide wheat shortage. If there are folks who are farmers or involved in the farm industry in the area, feel free to join our Benton County town hall that is coming up later this afternoon. We'd love to include you.
Yeah, I mean, the basic proposition that John is offering up is that we need more opportunities for ag to generate more good and healthful foods. And I'm all in on that. And I'm just trying to get a sense of how some local farmers might see it and what it means for grass seed, or I think John suggested clover, and different areas.
Great. So we're going to close with a follow-up question by Woody. Woody, take it away.
Senator Wyden, the Douglas Fir National Monument proposal is a good match to President Biden's 30 by 30 conservation initiative. Could you help to further the Douglas Fir National Monument proposal? Thank you.
Thank you, Woody. And we're looking at it. And what I do with the monument proposals, and it's been kind of part of my approach on these issues, is make sure that everybody knows before you go forward with the monument kind of effort, you give all sides a chance to be heard. But what a fitting name, the Doug Fir Monument. And again, it kind of sums up what's practically in our DNA, which is that we all love Doug Fir. And just get me everything you have, Woody, and we'll make it part of a kind of open discussion, which is how I always do these monuments.
Terrific. Thanks for the question, Woody. So that is it for our Linn County Town Hall. As I mentioned, we will be back in just a few hours at 3:30 p.m. In Benton County. Senator Wyden, any words for folks before then?
Yeah, I want, of course, to wish everybody good holidays this weekend, and say once again, Linn County, the place that always comes through for veterans and looks at these issues, as we've heard over this morning's discussion, with common sense first and politics second, has hit the right mark. There has not been a bad comment or a question from Linn County in the House, not a single one. And I think that's kind of representative of what it's like when I'm here. I want to thank everybody. It's a busy weekend, a lot going on, and families are having a chance to get together and make some wonderful meals. And I wish everyone good holidays. Thank you for taking the time to come out and educate me I don't have all the answers, not by a long shot. Sometimes I cast a vote at 11 o'clock and my wife calls me up and says, you blew that one, Buster. That was a bad vote. You should have done bump, bump, bump. And often callers, my wife included, right? And I'm not. So because of town hall, we're trying to, particularly when there is so much understandable frustration about government and the failure to do what we're talking about here, which is try to bring people together. We're trying to make sure that Oregonians have a chance to be heard. I want to thank everybody for doing it. And this is part of the pledge I made Oregonians. And as long as I have the honor to represent all of you, this is the way we'll do it. We'll do it so that everybody, every county, every year has a chance to be heard. Thanks, Linn County.
Thanks, Senator. We'll see everyone next time.